3 months later, Harmony Station had become the most famous location in the galaxy, and not for the reasons anyone could have predicted. The story of Emma and Starseeker had spread through every communications network, every trade route, and every diplomatic channel across known space. More importantly, it had sparked a revolution in thinking about interspecies relations. The first major change came from the Vorthax themselves. Starseeker's obvious happiness and continued healthy development, while maintaining peaceful friendships, had caused other Vorthak parents to reconsider their traditional isolation. A small but growing number of Vorthak families had requested permission to visit Harmony Station, hoping to understand what had made such friendship possible. Dr. Sarah Chen had been appointed as the station's first director of interspecies childhood development, a position that didn't exist before Emma's encounter with Starseeker. Her research into the cognitive and social development of alien children had become the foundation for a new field of study that was revolutionizing xenobiology across the galaxy. The key insight, she explained, to a gathering of scientists and diplomats is that fear is largely a learned behavior in most species. Children approach new situations with curiosity rather than suspicion. They evaluate individuals based on immediate behavior rather than species stereotypes. Emma didn't see a dangerous Vorthak predator. She saw a lonely child who needed a friend. The practical applications of this research were already being implemented throughout the galaxy. Several space stations had established friendship zones where children of different species could interact under careful supervision. The results were consistently positive. Young beings from species that had been enemies for centuries were forming genuine friendships. But the most significant changes were happening right on Harmony Station. The success of Emma and Starseeker's friendship had encouraged other unlikely partnerships. A group of young crystalline beings had started playing mathematical games with human children, their different ways of processing numbers creating fascinating collaborative solutions. Etherian youngsters were teaching granite folk children how to create beautiful patterns of movement, while learning about the satisfying solidity of stone building from their new friends. Emma had become something of a celebrity, though she remained remarkably unaffected by the attention. At 8 years old, she couldn't fully understand why her friendship with Starseeker was considered so important by the adults. To her, it was simply the natural result of being kind to someone who seemed lonely. Starseeker teaches me really cool things, she explained to a group of visiting diplomats. He showed me how to make my voice echo like his does, and he's teaching me to climb using just my fingertips. And I taught him how to draw pictures and how to make thunder roll in a straight line. We're both getting smarter because we're friends. Starseeker had changed as well, but in ways that strengthened rather than diminished his Vorthak nature. His natural intelligence had flourished in the social environment, and he had developed problem-solving skills that impressed even the adult Vorthaks who came to observe him. More importantly, he had learned to use his physical capabilities in cooperative rather than competitive ways. The young Vorthak had become an ambassador for his species in ways that no adult could match. When new alien children arrived at the station and seemed frightened by his appearance, Starseeker had developed a repertoire of gentle behaviors that quickly put them at ease. He would dim the glow of his eyes, shift his scales to soft, non-threatening colors, and approach slowly while making musical sounds that seemed universally calming. Scar-Bearer had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. Initially resistant to the changes in his offspring, he had gradually come to see that Starseeker was not becoming weak, but rather developing new kinds of strength. The adult Vorthak had begun participating in diplomatic discussions, sharing insights about his species that had been unknown to the rest of the galaxy. We were never purely predators, he explained during one historic session with the Galactic Council. We became isolated because other species feared us, and fear bred more fear. My offspring has shown me that cooperation can be as valuable as competition for survival. The ripple effects of this revelation were still spreading throughout galactic society. Trade agreements that had been impossible due to fear of Vorthak aggression were suddenly back on the negotiating table. Scientific collaborations were being proposed that could benefit from Vorthak precision and intelligence. Most importantly, several conflicts between other species were being reconsidered in light of the new understanding that fear often created the very aggression it sought to prevent. But for Emma and Starseeker, the most important changes were personal ones. Their friendship had deepened and matured over the months, developing the kind of trust and understanding that comes from truly knowing another being. They had created their own private language combining human words, Vorthak vocalizations, and original gestures that they had developed together. On this particular day, they were engaged in one of their favorite activities, building elaborate structures using blocks, crystals, and other materials donated by various species represented on the station. Starseeker's precise movements and spatial intelligence combined perfectly with Emma's creative imagination and human intuition about balance and aesthetics. "Look," Emma said excitedly, adding a delicate crystal bridge between two tower sections. "It's like a city where all different kinds of people could live together." Starseeker chirped approvingly and carefully added supports that would ensure the crystal bridge could bear weight. His architectural suggestions always made Emma's creative visions more practical and stable. Dr. Chen watched from nearby, still amazed by the complexity of their collaboration. The two children had developed a working partnership that allowed them to create things neither could have built alone. More importantly, they had learned to appreciate and compensate for each other's different capabilities without trying to change each other's fundamental nature. "They're going to change the galaxy," Administrator Kellix observed, joining Dr. Chen in watching the children play. "Not through politics or force, but simply by proving that friendship is possible between any two beings who approach each other with open hearts." As if to prove his point, a group of recently arrived quantum phase beings materialized near the children's building area. These energy-based life forms were notoriously difficult for physical beings to interact with, as they existed partially outside normal space-time. Most species found them incomprehensible and slightly frightening. Emma looked up at the shimmering, translucent figures with her usual bright curiosity. "Hi, are you new here? Do you want to help us build our friendship city?" Starseeker immediately began adjusting his scale colors to create patterns that might be more visible to energy-based vision, while making welcoming vocalizations at frequencies he had learned could be perceived across dimensional barriers. The quantum phase beings hesitated, their forms flickering with what might have been surprise. Then slowly one of them began to solidify slightly, taking on a more defined shape that could interact with physical matter. Dr. Chen smiled as she watched her daughter and Starseeker welcome yet another impossible friendship into their growing circle. The children didn't see barriers. They saw opportunities. They didn't fear differences. They celebrated them. As the three young beings began working together on their construction project, each contributing unique capabilities that enhanced the other's work, it became clear that Emma's simple act of kindness 3 months ago had started something that could never be stopped. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be. Fear had kept species apart for centuries, but love and friendship, as demonstrated by two children who dared to see past their differences, would bring them together for generations to come. In the end, it hadn't taken armies or treaties or technological breakthroughs to change the course of galactic civilization. It had taken one lonely alien child and one brave human girl, who understood that friendship was the most powerful force in the universe. The diplomatic meeting that followed Emma's simple request would later be remembered as one of the most significant moments in galactic history. Administrator Kellix, recognizing the profound nature of what was unfolding, suggested a carefully monitored interaction between the two children while the adults continued their discussions. A smaller observation room was prepared with representatives from multiple species watching through protective barriers. Dr. Chen insisted on being present, while Scarbearer positioned himself where he could intervene if necessary. The setup was unprecedented, a controlled first contact situation between youngsters, with the safety of both children being the primary concern of all parties involved. Emma entered the room carrying her wooden horse and a collection of drawings she had made. Starseeker's scales immediately brightened to cheerful blues and greens as he saw his friend again. The young Vorthak had brought something as well, a small crystalline object that glowed with internal light, obviously something precious from his own culture. "Hi again," Emma said cheerfully, settling down on the floor in the same cross-legged position she had used during their first meeting. "I brought thunder like I promised, and look." She held up her drawings, which showed colorful stick figures of herself and Starseeker playing together. "I drew us being friends." Starseeker examined the drawings with obvious fascination. his glowing eyes tracing the simple lines that somehow captured the essence of their peaceful interaction. He made soft, trilling sounds that seemed to convey pleasure and understanding. Then, with careful ceremony, the young Vorthak presented his own gift. The crystalline object was about the size of Emma's fist, and it pulsed with gentle light that shifted through different colors. Starseeker held it out to Emma while making complex vocalizations that his father later translated as a formal gift-giving ritual in Vorthak culture. "Oh, it's beautiful," Emma breathed, accepting the crystal with appropriate reverence. "Thank you so much. Is it okay to hold it? I don't want to break it." Starseeker's response was to gently guide Emma's hands into the proper position for holding the crystal. When she had it correctly, the object's glow intensified, apparently responding to her touch. The young Vorthak clapped his claws together in obvious delight at her reaction. The watching adults were stunned by what they were witnessing. The crystal that Starseeker had given Emma was clearly a family heirloom, something of deep significance in Vorthak culture. The fact that the cub had chosen to give it to a member of another species was revolutionary. Dr. Chen found herself taking notes as she watched the interaction. The two children had developed their own form of communication that transcended language barriers. Emma would speak in simple sentences while showing Starseeker objects or drawings. The young Vorthak would respond with vocalizations and careful gestures, often demonstrating concepts through movement or touch. More importantly, both children were learning from each other. Emma was becoming more careful and deliberate in her movements, copying Starseeker's precise way of handling delicate objects. The young Vorthak was experimenting with softer vocalizations, trying to match the gentle tones that Emma used when speaking. "Look at this," Dr. Chen whispered to Administrator Kellex. "They're not just playing together. They're actually adapting their behaviors to accommodate each other's needs. Emma is naturally boisterous, but she's learned to be calmer around Starseeker. And he's making an effort to be less intimidating, even though intimidation is supposedly programmed into his species." The implications were staggering. If young beings from completely different species could adapt and cooperate so readily, what did that say about the possibilities for adult interaction? How much of the fear and aggression between species was learned behavior, rather than genetic programming? Scarbearer had been watching his offspring with growing amazement. Starseeker's happiness was obvious in every movement, every color shift of his scales, every musical vocalization. The young Vorthak was displaying levels of joy and social satisfaction that Scarbearer had never seen before. More importantly, Starseeker was still demonstrating the intelligence and careful decision-making that were hallmarks of Vorthak's survival instincts. He wasn't becoming weak or careless. Instead, he was learning to apply those same survival skills to social cooperation rather than solitary hunting. When Emma accidentally dropped the wooden horse and it rolled toward a ventilation grate where it might be lost, Starseeker's response was lightning fast. The young Vorthak darted forward with predatory speed and precision, catching the toy before it could fall through the grate. But instead of keeping it, he immediately returned it to Emma with gentle care. "He still got all his natural reflexes and abilities," Dr. Chen observed, "but he's choosing to use them to help rather than to dominate. That level of conscious decision-making suggests incredible intelligence." The session continued for over an hour, with both children completely absorbed in their interaction. They played simple games, shared more objects from their respective cultures, and even attempted to teach each other basic concepts from their languages. Emma learned to make a few Vorthak sounds while Starseeker began experimenting with human-like gestures. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Emma grew tired and began to yawn. Without being asked, Starseeker positioned himself so that Emma could lean against his side while she rested. The young Vorthak's scales automatically adjusted to a warm, comfortable temperature, and he made soft humming sounds that seemed designed to be soothing. "That's apparent behavior," Scarbearer rumbled quietly to the watching adults. "He is caring for her as he would care for a younger clutchmate. I have never seen him do this before." Dr. Chen felt her eyes growing moist as she watched her daughter sleeping peacefully against the young alien who had become her friend. The image challenged every assumption about species compatibility and the nature of friendship itself. Administrator Kellex was already making plans. "We need to document this extensively," he said quietly. "Not just for scientific purposes, but for diplomatic ones. If this kind of cooperation is possible between children, We need to explore whether it can be extended to adult relations. The session ended when Emma woke up naturally, refreshed from her nap and ready to continue playing. But the adults recognized that both children had been engaged in intense social and cognitive work for hours. It was time to let them rest and process what they had learned. As they prepared to separate, both children showed obvious reluctance to end their time together. Emma gave Starseeker a gentle hug, which the young Vorthak returned by carefully wrapping his arms around her, while being mindful of his claws. Starseeker then did something that surprised everyone. He made a series of focalizations while pointing at the viewing windows where the adults were watching. Scarbearers. Translation sent shockwaves through the observation room. He is asking when the adults will be brave enough to try being friends too. The question from a child cut straight to the heart of centuries of fear, mistrust, and missed opportunities. As the two families prepared to return to their respective quarters, everyone present realized that the real test was just beginning. The children had shown that friendship across species lines was possible. Now it was up to the adults to decide whether they had the courage to follow their children's example. News of the encounter spread through Harmony Station like wildfire, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of panic about humans making contact with dangerous predators, the alien communities found themselves fascinated by something unprecedented, proof that Vorthaks were capable of peaceful interaction. The security footage from the observation area had been reviewed dozens of times by station administrators, xenobiologists, and representatives from various alien governments. The images showed clearly what had happened, but many found it difficult to believe. A human child playing peacefully with a Vorthak cub while the adult parent watched approvingly? It challenged fundamental assumptions that had shaped galactic politics for centuries. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a diplomatic storm she never could have imagined. Her background in xenobiology made her the closest thing to an expert on the situation, and requests for interviews, statements, and analyses flooded her communication system. But her primary concern remained her daughter's safety and well-being. "Emma, sweetheart, we need to talk about what happened yesterday," Dr. Chen said as they sat in their quarters aboard the Wandering Star. "Do you understand that you could have been hurt?" Emma looked up from her coloring tablet, where she had been drawing pictures of her new friend. "But Mom, he wasn't mean at all. He was just lonely. And his daddy was very polite. He moved out of the way when you wanted to come through the door. Those weren't ordinary aliens, baby. They're called Vorthaks, and they're very dangerous. Most people are scared of them because they can be violent. But they weren't violent with me," Emma said with the simple logic of childhood. "Maybe they're only violent when people are mean to them first. Thunder doesn't bite unless someone tries to hurt him." Thunder was their family cat back on Earth, and Dr. Chen had to admit that Emma's comparison wasn't entirely without merit. Perhaps fear and aggression were learned behaviors that built upon each other across species. Meanwhile, in the Vorthak ship docked at Bay 47, a very different conversation was taking place. The adult Vorthak, whose name translated roughly to Scarbearer in galactic common language, was trying to understand his offspring's unusual behavior. The young cub, called Starseeker by his parent, had been different from other Vorthak youngsters even before this encounter. Where most cubs showed early signs of the aggressive instincts that made their species so feared, Starseeker had always been more curious than confrontational, more interested in exploring than hunting. Scarbearer had brought his offspring to Harmony Station specifically because he was concerned about these traits. In Vorthak culture, weakness was not tolerated, and failure to develop proper predatory instincts could lead to exile or worse. He had hoped that exposure to other species might trigger the aggressive responses that seemed to be lacking in his cub. Instead, Starseeker had made friends with what appeared to be a juvenile human. The cub's excited attempts to communicate the experience to his parent revealed depths of empathy and social intelligence that were supposedly impossible in their species. Through complex vocalizations and body language, Starseeker tried to explain to his father what he had felt during the encounter. The human child had shown no fear, no aggression, only curiosity and kindness. For the first time in his young life, Starseeker had experienced what could only be called friendship. Scarbearer found himself in an impossible position. According to the laws and traditions of his people, he should have been teaching his offspring to be a proper predator. But the joy and excitement that Starseeker showed when talking about the human child suggested that forcing such behavior might damage something precious and unique in his cub's nature. The situation became more complicated when Scarbearer received an unexpected communication. Station Administrator Kellex, a diplomatic Etherian known for his skill in handling delicate situations, was requesting a meeting. Not an interrogation, not a demand for the Vorthax to leave, but an actual diplomatic meeting. Honored Scarbearer, the message began, using the formal protocols that showed respect for Vorthak traditions. Recent events have created opportunities for understanding that we believe could benefit all species on this station. We request your presence at a gathering where questions may be asked and perhaps answered, with full assurance of safe passage and diplomatic immunity. The message was unlike anything any Vorthak had ever received. Throughout galactic history, other species had either fled from them or attempted to destroy them. The concept of diplomatic immunity was something Vorthax had heard about but never experienced personally. Scarbearer's decision to accept the meeting shocked everyone involved, including himself. But Starseeker's obvious desire to see the human child again, combined with his own curiosity about these unprecedented events, convinced him to take the risk. The meeting was arranged in one of the station's larger conference rooms, with representatives from multiple species in attendance. The Etherians floated gracefully in their designated areas, while the crystalline prism folk created beautiful patterns of refracted light as they moved. Even some of the usually reclusive hive mind collective had sent representatives, their insectoid forms clicking softly as they communicated among themselves. Dr. Chen attended with Emma. Despite protests from Lieutenant Torres and other security personnel, the 8-year-old had insisted on coming, and Sarah realized that her daughter might be the key to understanding what had happened. When Scarbearer entered the conference room with Starseeker beside him, the reaction was unlike anything seen before on Harmony Station. Instead of panic and evacuation, there was tense curiosity. The presence of so many representatives from different species seemed to reassure everyone that this was truly a diplomatic gathering rather than a potential threat situation. Emma's face lit up when she saw her friend, and she waved enthusiastically. Starseeker's scales immediately shifted to brighter colors, and he made excited chirping sounds. The young Vorthak started to move toward Emma, but stopped when his father made a low rumbling sound. Administrator Kellex began the meeting with formal diplomatic protocols, acknowledging all species present and establishing the peaceful nature of the gathering. But when he asked Scarbearer to explain his people's intentions, the adult Vorthak's response surprised everyone. "We came seeking trade opportunities and safe passage," Scarbearer said in heavily accented but understandable galactic common. "We did not come seeking friendship. We did not expect kindness. Yet both were offered freely by the human child." The admission that Vorthaks were capable of peaceful trade negotiations sent ripples of shock through the assembled aliens. Many species had assumed that Vorthaks were purely destructive, incapable of economic cooperation. "My offspring has learned something from the human child that I cannot teach," Scarbearer continued. "Perhaps there are things all our species might learn from each other. If fear did not prevent the attempt." Emma raised her hand like she was in school, causing nervous laughter among the assembled diplomats. "Can Starseeker play with me again? I brought Thunder to show him, and I drew pictures of him that I want to give him." The simple request from a child cut through all the complex diplomatic considerations. Here was the heart of the matter. Two young beings who had found friendship across species barriers, asking only to continue what they had started. Scarbearer looked at his offspring, whose scales were shifting through hopeful colors as he waited for his father's decision. For the first time in Vorthak recorded history, a parent was being asked to choose between traditional isolation and the unknown possibilities of peaceful contact with other species. The silence in the corridor stretched for what felt like an eternity. Behind the adult Vorthak, Lieutenant Torres stood frozen with her weapon half-drawn, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. Several station security officers flanked her, their faces pale with terror at finding themselves in close proximity to the galaxy's most feared predator. Dr. Sarah Chen pushed past them, her maternal instincts overriding her scientific training as she saw her daughter standing casually next to creatures that could tear a person apart without effort. The adult Vorthak remained perfectly still, its burning gaze moving between Emma and the approaching humans. Its massive head turned slightly to observe the fear radiating from the adults, then back to the small human child who showed no such fear. The creature's intelligence was clearly visible as it processed this unprecedented situation. Emma, oblivious to the tension surrounding her, continued chatting cheerfully. I have to go now because the grown-ups are here, and they look worried. But I hope I see you again soon. She turned to the cub and waved. Bye-bye. Thanks for playing with me. The young Vorthak made soft chirping sounds and took a step closer to Emma, clearly not wanting their interaction to end. It looked up at its parent and made more complex vocalizations, its body language suggesting it was trying to explain something important. Emma, baby, come here slowly, Dr. Chen called from behind the adult Vorthak, her voice carefully controlled despite her terror. Don't make any sudden movements. But Mom, I want you to meet my new friend, Emma replied, apparently not understanding why her mother sounded so scared. He's really nice, and look how pretty his scales are. The adult Vorthak's head turned toward Dr. Chen's voice, and for the first time it moved. The massive creature stepped aside, clearing the doorway. This simple action sent shockwaves through the human search party. According to every piece of intelligence they had about Vorthaks, the creature should have been defending its territory aggressively, not politely making room for others to pass. Lieutenant Torres was the first to move, her training overriding her fear. She approached slowly, her weapon now holstered but her hand ready to draw it again if necessary. Emma, listen to me very carefully. I want you to walk toward me slowly. Don't run, don't make loud noises. Just walk normally. Why is everyone acting so weird? Emma asked, but she began walking toward the lieutenant as requested. They're not scary. They're just different. As Emma moved away from the two Vorthaks, something unexpected happened. The cub followed her, staying about 2 feet behind the little girl. When Emma stopped, the cub stopped. When she looked back at it, the young creature made encouraging chirping sounds, as if urging her to continue. The adult Vorthak watched this interaction with what could only be described as fascination. Its offspring had never shown such interest in any other species before. Throughout their travels across the galaxy, other beings had fled in terror, never giving the cub a chance to interact peacefully with anyone outside their own kind. Dr. Chen finally managed to push past the paralyzed security officers and rushed toward her daughter. Emma, thank goodness you're safe. She scooped the 8-year-old into her arms, her hands shaking with relief and residual fear. Mom, you're squishing me, Emma protested, and you're being rude to my new friends. Friends? Dr. Chen looked over Emma's shoulder at the two Vorthaks, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The cub had moved closer again and was looking up at them with obvious interest. The adult remained where it was, but its posture suggested watchful attention rather than aggression. The little one was sad and lonely, Emma explained matter-of-factly, so I played with him. We rolled thunder back and forth, and he was really careful not to hurt the toy. He's very gentle. Lieutenant Torres had finally reached them and was trying to position herself protectively between the humans and the Vorthaks. But her tactical training was being challenged by what she was observing. The creatures weren't behaving according to any protocol she had studied. We need to evacuate this area immediately, Torres said quietly to Dr. Chen. Whatever's happening here, we need to get Emma to safety. But as they began to move toward the exit, the young Vorthak made a sound that stopped everyone in their tracks. It was a distinctly distressed vocalization, the same lonely sound that had first attracted Emma's attention. The cub was clearly upset about their departure. Emma wriggled in her mother's arms until she was set down. Against all the adults' protests, she turned back toward the young Vorthak. It's okay, she said gently. I have to go now, but maybe I'll see you again. The cub's scales shifted to darker, sadder colors. It approached slowly and with infinite care, touched Emma's hand with the tip of one small claw. The gesture was so gentle, so obviously meant as a farewell caress, that even the terrified adults could see the genuine affection behind it. Dr. Chen, despite her fear, found herself observing the interaction with scientific interest. The young Vorthak's behavior contradicted everything known about their species. The care it showed, the obvious emotional intelligence, the desire for companionship with a completely different species. It was revolutionary. The adult Vorthak had been watching this entire exchange in silence. Now it approached slowly, its massive form moving with surprising grace. The humans tensed, ready to run or fight, but the creature stopped several feet away and did something that stunned everyone present. It sat down. The simple action of lowering itself to a less threatening position was clearly deliberate. The adult Vorthak's glowing eyes met Dr. Chen's, and for a moment there was a communication that transcended species barriers. Two parents recognizing each other's protective instincts and genuine care for their young. The adult made soft rumbling sounds to its offspring, who responded with excited chirping. The conversation between them was obviously complex, though the humans couldn't understand the content. Emma, with the fearless curiosity that had started this entire encounter, stepped forward again. "Thank you for being nice to me," she said to the adult Vorthak, speaking as politely as she would to any grown-up. "Your little boy is wonderful." The adult tilted its massive head, studying Emma with what might have been surprise, respect, or something else entirely. Then, in a gesture that would be talked about across the galaxy for years to come, the feared predator slowly lowered its head in what could only be interpreted as a nod of acknowledgement. "Lieutenant." Torres's hand tightened on her. "Communicate her," as she prepared to report this unprecedented encounter to Station Command. How could she possibly explain what she had witnessed? How could anyone believe that the galaxy's most feared predators had just engaged in peaceful, respectful interaction with a human child? As the humans finally began their careful retreat from the observation area, Emma turned back one more time to wave at her new friends. The young Vorthak chirped happily and waved back with one small claw, while the adult watched thoughtfully from behind. None of them realized that this simple encounter between a lonely, alien child and a kind human girl was about to change everything. The galaxy thought it knew about Vorthak's humans and the true meaning of friendship. Emma continued her slow approach toward the young Vorthak, her natural instincts guiding her movements. She had always been good with animals, and something about this creature reminded her of the nervous cats that sometimes visited her grandmother's garden back on Earth. The way it held itself, alert but not aggressive, curious but ready to flee if necessary. "You're really pretty," Emma said softly, settling down on the floor about 6 feet away from the cub. She had learned that sitting made her seem less threatening to shy creatures. "I like how your skin changes colors. It's like the soap bubbles my mom makes in the bathtub." The cub's scale shifted from purple to a softer blue-green as Emma spoke. Whether this was a response to her voice or simply coincidence, the color change delighted the little girl. She giggled, a sound that seemed to fascinate the young Vorthak even more. "Can you understand me?" Emma asked, tilting her head to mirror the cub's posture. "Probably not, huh?" "That's okay. I don't understand most of the grown-ups here either. They use too many big words." The cub made another soft chirping sound and took a tentative step closer. Up close, Emma could see that its claws, while sharp-looking, were small and seemed more suited for climbing than fighting. Its glowing eyes weren't scary at all when you really looked at them. They reminded her of the fireflies that danced in her backyard during summer evenings. "Are you lost too?" Emma asked. "I was with Lieutenant Torres, but there were so many big aliens running around and making noise, and I got scared and ran away. Mom says I'm not supposed to run away when I'm scared, but sometimes your feet just go by themselves, you know?" The cub seemed to respond to the tone of her voice, settling down onto its haunches in a position that mirrored Emma's sitting posture. This small gesture of mimicry broke down another barrier between them. Emma slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out one of her most treasured possessions. A small, hand-carved wooden horse that her grandfather had made for her before he died. The toy was worn smooth from handling, and several of its painted details had faded, but it remained her favorite companion during space travels. "This is Thunder," she said, holding up the toy horse so the cub could see it. "He's been to lots of places with me. Want to see?" She placed the wooden horse on the floor between them and gave it a gentle push. The toy rolled slightly toward the cub, who leaned forward to examine it with obvious interest. The young Vorthak's nostrils flared as it scented the unfamiliar object, and it made soft questioning sounds. "It's okay, you can touch it," Emma encouraged. "Thunder likes making new friends." The cub extended one small claw and very carefully touched the wooden horse. The toy was so light that even that gentle contact sent it rolling back toward Emma. The cub's eyes widened with what looked like delight, and it made excited chirping sounds. "You want to play?" Emma asked, understanding the universal language of play that transcended species barriers. She pushed the toy back toward the cub, this time with a little more force so it rolled all the way to the creature's feet. What happened next was magical in its simplicity. The young Vorthak, with careful precision, used the tip of one claw to push the toy back toward Emma. The wooden horse rolled across the smooth floor, and Emma clapped her hands together in delight. "You're so smart," she exclaimed. "And gentle, too. I bet you're really good at games." They continued their simple game of rolling the toy back and forth, each exchange building trust and understanding between the two youngsters. The cub's movements became more confident, and its chirping took on a distinctly playful quality. Emma found herself copying some of the sounds, which seemed to delight her new friend even more. During one of these exchanges, the wooden horse rolled to a stop halfway between them. Both children reached for it at the same time, and for a moment Emma's small human hand was very close to the cub's clawed appendage. Neither pulled away. Instead, they looked at each other and seemed to share some kind of understanding that went beyond words or species. "We're friends now, aren't we?" Emma said quietly. "I can tell. You have kind eyes just like my cat Whiskers back home." The cub made a soft trilling sound that seemed to convey agreement. It carefully picked up the wooden horse with the tips of its claws and handed it back to Emma, a gesture that showed remarkable dexterity and thoughtfulness. Their peaceful interaction was suddenly interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching down the corridor. The cub's head snapped up, its posture immediately becoming alert. The scales on its back shifted to a darker color, and it moved protectively closer to Emma, positioning itself between her and the source of the sound. Emma looked up to see the most impressive creature she had ever encountered. The adult Vorthak stood in the entrance to the observation area, its massive form filling the doorway. Its black scales seemed to absorb the light around it, and its glowing red eyes surveyed the scene with an intensity that would have terrified any adult in the galaxy. But Emma, in her innocent wisdom, saw something different. She saw the way the adult's gaze immediately went to the cub, checking to make sure the young one was safe. She saw how its posture, while imposing, wasn't aggressive toward her. Most importantly, she saw the clear family resemblance between the large creature and her new small friend. "Oh," Emma said brightly, scrambling to her feet. "You must be his daddy. Hi. I'm Emma, and I was playing with your little boy. He's really nice and very good at games." The adult Vorthak's head tilted slightly, much the way the cub's had when trying to understand her earlier. The glowing eyes studied Emma with what might have been confusion. Here was a creature that should have been running in terror, instead greeting him as if he were just another parent picking up their child from a playdate. The cub chirped excitedly and moved between Emma and its parent, its body language clearly indicating that this strange new creature was a friend, not a threat. The young Vorthak seemed to be trying to communicate their peaceful interaction to the adult. Behind the massive form of the adult Vorthak, Emma could hear more footsteps approaching, along with voices calling her name. Lieutenant Torres and the search party had finally tracked her down, but they had stopped short when they realized what they were approaching. Emma, completely unaware of the tension building in the corridor behind the adult Vorthak, waved cheerfully at the imposing creature. "Thank you for letting me play with him," she said politely, the way her mother had taught her to thank other parents. "He's really fun, and I think he was lonely before. Will you bring him back tomorrow? We could play more games." The space station Harmony floated in the neutral zone between 3 different star systems, a place where dozens of alien species came to trade, negotiate, and conduct business. The massive structure stretched for miles in every direction, its gleaming corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Tall, graceful Etherians glided through the halls with their translucent skin shimmering like water. Short, stocky granite folk rolled past on their wheel-like appendages, their rocky exteriors clicking against the metal floors. Flying Zephyrians swooped overhead, their gossamer wings catching the artificial light. But today, something was different. A tension filled the air that made even the bravest traders nervous. Word had spread quickly through the station's communication networks and whispered conversations in 100 different languages. A Vorthak ship had docked at Bay 47. The Vorthaks were legends throughout the galaxy, stories told to frightening children and new space travelers. They were apex predators from a world where only the strongest survived. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies were covered in midnight black scales that could deflect most energy weapons. Their eyes glowed like burning coals, and their mouths held rows of razor-sharp teeth designed for tearing through the toughest materials. Most terrifying of all were their claws, each one as long as a human forearm and capable of slicing through steel. For 3 days, The adult Vorthak had remained on his ship, conducting business through encrypted communications. Nobody had seen him and nobody wanted to. The mere knowledge of his presence had caused half the station's visitors to cut their trips short and flee to safer locations. Restaurant owners closed early, merchants packed up their stalls, and even the station's security forces seemed on edge. But on the fourth day, everything changed. The Vorthak emerged from his ship, and with him came something that stunned every living being on the station. Walking beside the terrifying predator was a small figure, barely reaching the alien's knee. It was clearly a young Vorthak, but unlike any creature the galaxy had ever seen before. The cub appeared to be no more than the equivalent of a 6-year-old human child. Its scales were not the deep black of its parent, but instead shimmered with an iridescent quality that shifted between deep purple and silver. The glowing eyes that seemed so menacing on the adult were large and curious on the young one, giving it an almost endearing appearance. Its claws were present but small, more like a kitten's than a weapon of destruction. The adult Vorthak moved through the station with purpose, his massive form causing every other being to scatter like leaves before a hurricane. But the little cub moved differently. It looked around with wonder at all the strange aliens, its head turning this way and that as it tried to take in everything at once. When a group of crystalline prism folk suddenly changed direction to avoid them, the cub stopped and stared, fascinated by the way light bent through their bodies. The parent noticed the cub's distraction and made a low rumbling sound that might have been communication in their language. The little one hurried to catch up, but its attention was quickly caught by something else. A merchant had dropped a small shiny object in his haste to pack up his stall. The cub's eyes fixed on the glittering item, and it moved toward it with the curiosity that seemed universal among young creatures. This simple action sent waves of panic through the nearby aliens. A group of insectoid hive minds began clicking frantically to each other before scurrying away on their 6 legs. The plant-like verdant ones rustled their leaves in what could only be described as terror, and began rooting themselves to the floor, hoping to avoid notice. Even the usually brave stellar wolves, known throughout the galaxy for their fierce independence, tucked their tails and slunk away into the shadows. The adult Vorthak, realizing his offspring had stopped following, turned around. When he saw what had captured the cub's attention, his glowing eyes seemed to burn brighter. He moved back toward the young one with swift, predatory grace. Every alien in the vicinity held their breath, expecting to witness the kind of violence that made Vorthak so feared throughout the galaxy. But instead of anger, the adult's behavior suggested something entirely different. He bent down, his massive form carefully positioned to avoid accidentally crushing anything, and made soft rumbling sounds to the cub. The little one looked up at its parent and then pointed at the shiny object with one small claw. The adult examined the item, picked it up with surprising gentleness, and handed it to the cub. This interaction, while touching to observe, did nothing to ease the fears of the surrounding aliens. If anything, it made things worse. The sight of 2 Vorthaks, even one small and seemingly harmless, was more than most species could handle. The evacuation of the area became more urgent. Store owners activated emergency shutters, sealing their establishments. The few security guards in the area began ushering civilians toward other sections of the station. Within minutes, an entire section of Harmony Station had become virtually empty, except for the 2 Vorthaks. The adult seemed unbothered by this reaction, perhaps even expecting it. He had likely experienced similar responses throughout his travels across the galaxy, but the cub appeared confused by the sudden absence of all the interesting beings it had been watching. The little Vorthak looked around at the empty corridors, its iridescent scales shifting color in what might have been disappointment. It made small chirping sounds, perhaps asking its parent where everyone had gone. The adult responded with more rumbling communications, but the cub's body language suggested it didn't fully understand why their mere presence had caused such a dramatic reaction. As they continued walking through the now empty section of the station, the cub's earlier enthusiasm began to fade. It moved closer to its parent, occasionally looking over its shoulder as if hoping to see some of the fascinating aliens return. But the corridors remained empty, filled only with the mechanical hums and beeps of the station's automated systems. The adult Vorthak's mission, whatever it might be, seemed to require visiting specific locations throughout the station. But everywhere they went, the same pattern repeated. Aliens would spot them, Panic would spread like wildfire, and entire areas would empty in minutes. The cub was beginning to understand that something about them caused fear, though it clearly didn't comprehend why. This was the state of things when everything was about to change, setting in motion events that would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about both Vorthax and the power of simple kindness.